Right now, there are millions of people sitting in dark rooms, phones face down, staring at a wall, convinced they are draining a poison. They have bought into a story that feels highly scientific, the dopamine detox. The problem is, you cannot detox from dopamine. The chemical the internet is telling you to flush out of your system is the exact same chemical that gets you out of bed, makes you chase a goal, and keeps you alive. You could no more detox from dopamine than you could detox from your own heartbeat. Think about a modern worker we will call Daniel. He decides he is completely overwhelmed by his screen time, so he commits to a strict 30-day dopamine fast. No social media, no video games, no junk food, and no music while he works. For about 4 days, the silence feels like medicine. Then the cracks appear. He cannot focus on reading, so he reorganizes his entire room. He cannot sit through the boredom, so he takes aimless walks where his mind chews on anxious loops. By day 12, he is checking the weather app 40 times a day. By day 20, he quietly relapses into a marathon of the exact scrolling he was avoiding, ending up worse than when he started. Daniel's mistake was the model itself. The willpower approach treats human attention like a tank of fuel you can simply refuse to spend. But a craving brain is a hunter. It does not sit quietly when denied. If you try to starve it, you create a vacuum it will forcefully fill. We actually have hard empirical data on how this plays out. Researchers ran a careful experiment tracking over 100 students with software. They asked the treatment group to cut their social media use down to just 10 minutes a day for 2.5 months. This chart shows the results. When the students severely restricted their social media, their well-being did not improve. Their grades stayed entirely flat, and their total screen time barely changed. The students simply took that blocked time and poured it into messaging apps instead. They swapped one stream of cheap stimulation for another. When you slam one door on a craving without actively building a new habit, the brain simply walks through the next open door to find the nearest available alternative. To understand why deprivation fails, we have to look at what dopamine actually does. For decades, people assumed it was the pleasure chemical, but a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz spent years recording dopamine neurons in lab animals, and his juice experiments broke that theory entirely. This diagram illustrates the initial phase of the experiment. A thirsty animal sits in a lab. A light turns on, and a moment later a drop of juice arrives. The first few times, the dopamine fires directly at the juice, the surprise of it. But after a few rounds, the neurons stop firing at the juice. The signal jumps backward in time, away from the reward and onto the light. The brain has learned the pattern. It now cares about the cue. Researchers call this a reward prediction error. Dopamine is tracking the gap between what you expected and what you got. It is a learning signal, a teacher constantly whispering that an action was worth more than you thought, and you should do it again. Everything you have ever learned to want was shaped by this quiet accounting. Your deepest motivations are not driven by receiving the reward itself, but by the anticipation and the promise of getting it. Now hold that idea against your phone. Scrolling rarely feels amazing in the moment, but the evolution of these devices has perfectly weaponized that biological mechanism of anticipation. The phone is compelling because it is unpredictable. You never know if the next swipe is a boring post or something that lights you up. That uncertainty is rocket fuel for dopamine. Your feed is quite literally a slot machine that fits in your pocket and never runs out of coins. When you flood your reward system with constant, intense hits from that overstimulation, your brain does what any sane system does under overload. It turns down the volume. The receptors that catch dopamine pull back and become less sensitive to protect the system. This is why a walk outside suddenly feels flat. It is why a real conversation feels like work. You have not become lazy. You have spent months training your reward system against a constant blast of artificial intensity, and now ordinary, baseline life cannot compete. If your receptors are overwhelmed, starving them in a dark room is not the answer. They will only come forward again if you engage in a slow, patient recalibration of what your brain expects. This graph shows data from research where people simply trimmed their social media by 15 minutes a day. That small, sustainable cut lowered loneliness and improved physical health markers. a minor, consistent reduction beat the dramatic gesture of a total fast. You can start this recalibration the moment you wake up. Instead of handing your brain an effortless spike of stimulation by checking your phone in bed, make the first reward of your day cost a little effort. Move your body, get some sunlight, or finish a small task before looking at a screen. Then, design your environment so the cheap rewards take physical effort to reach. Leave the phone in another room while you work. When you do play the game or watch the show, stack it directly after the deep work. You are not adopting a life of joyless deprivation. You are actively teaching your reward system a new pattern, that effort pays, and that the best feelings exist on the far side of difficult work. The Stoics never used the word dopamine, but they understood this exact mechanism in their bones. They warned against being ruled by pleasures that come too easily, knowing they make a person weak, restless, and always reaching for the next distraction. Their answer was never numb withdrawal, it was deliberate engagement with the right things. What they called mastery of the appetite, modern neuroscience calls a well-calibrated, effort-driven dopamine system. The engine that makes this recalibration work is not heroic willpower. Studies tracking habit formation reveal that success goes to those who show up in the same context day after day. The discipline forms through patient, boring repetition until the action stops requiring a decision at all. You own a learning machine that will become whatever you repeatedly feed it. Every time you choose the harder, deeper task over the cheap instant reward, you are casting a vote. You are actively training those neurons and forging a mind that does not break under pressure.